we're going to start off the show by, of course, talking about last night's game between the Chiefs and the Ravens. And this ultimately turned into a classic to kick off the 2024 season. Last year as well, these past couple seasons with the Chiefs, we've been, very lucky as to getting some awesome games to kick off the year. And it definitely lived up to expectations. A rematch of last season's AFC Championship game. And once again, it was the Chiefs coming out on top, but just barely. It took Isaiah Likely wearing a shoe size, one size too big, for the Chiefs to come away with this win. So ultimately, it was a very close game, went down to the final seconds, and we're going to break it down from both perspectives. But I want to start on the side of the Chiefs here, and my biggest takeaway really for them in this game was the fact that their offense looks like it can start to return to form to at least some degree, considering the fact that even last year was ugly. I think we can all acknowledge from at least an aesthetic standpoint of talking about their offense. It was very stagnant at times. The Chiefs led the NFL in drops as a team, and there were a lot of red flags. It was the first time in the Patrick Mahomes era in Kansas City that the Chiefs finished outside of the top 6 in points per game. The Chiefs' offense last year was 15th. So, again, considering you have Patrick Mahomes offensively, the regular season last year was a bit of a mess. Now, obviously, we saw they were able to overcome that, and ultimately the offense was there enough for their playoff run. But that being said, they were very reliant as well on their defense. They were some grinded out, low scoring games, even in the playoffs as well to some degree. Only 19 points scored in regulation against the 49ers in overtime, or in regulation before overtime. I believe it was 17 points scored against the Ravens in the AFC Championship game. So the Chiefs definitely have hopes that their offense can sort of take a step forward once again, and I thought that they showed a lot of promise in that category with their performance last night. Rashee Rice looks like he could legitimately emerge as a number one wide receiver for this Chiefs team. He was excellent. 7 receptions, 103 yards, and he's somebody who started to emerge down the stretch of last season, averaged 86 receiving yards per game from week 11 through the end of the regular season, which is great. But now it seems like he could even take on a bigger role. And this is something we're going to get into Travis Kelce in particular a little bit later. But he had a quieter game. And part of it was because I thought that Rice really emerged in that intermediate passing game where Travis Kelce has been so prominent these past couple years, that Rice was actually the one with his route running, just getting open across the middle of the field. And Patrick Mahomes hitting him about 5-10 yards downfield, and then him making some additional moves with the ball in his hand to ultimately total 103 yards in this game. And I think that is a really great sign for them. Obviously, it's great when you have Travis Kelce. That gives you the flexibility to move off potentially the best wide receiver in the NFL in Tyreek Hill. But Travis is obviously getting older, and there's only so long that you can hold on to those aging tight ends, essentially as your number one receiving threat. In steps Rashee Rice, and it seems like he could maybe be somebody who takes on a bigger role this upcoming season. I feel like a lot of people were sort of unsure with him, myself included to some degree, just a matter of what the overall split of the work share is going to be between all of the pass catchers in Kansas City, and Rice looked phenomenal for them, at least to start off the season. Then to that, you add Xavier Worthy, the first-round rookie that is garnering a lot of love this morning, considering the fact that it's clear that he is a special athletic talent with some upside as well, and a ton of room to grow as more than just an athlete, but somebody like Tyreek Hill, where yes, obviously what catches the eye immediately is the blazing speed, but I mean, for whatever it's worth, he ends up scoring on his first touch of the game. Andy Reid absolutely had that play that Worthy ended up scoring on. It was a reverse jet sweep to Worthy. That's something that that he had drawn up from the moment that he knew they were going to take Rashee Rice, or take Xavier Worthy, excuse me, and ultimately, that was a heads-up play, and the way that he weaved through traffic Worthy on that play, very impressive to me. He only had 3 touches in this game, but he made the most of every single opportunity. All 3 of them were at least 12 yards, and 2 of them were for touchdowns. So he also had the touchdown in the second half where it was a blown coverage from the Ravens defense, and ultimately he was just wide open, streaking to the end zone, and naturally Patrick Mahomes is going to find a wide open receiver like that. So I'm definitely very high on it. I still think that, I wouldn't bank on him being a 2 touchdown a game guy. I think that he's going to have moments where he's a little bit more hit or miss, but again, the ceiling with Worthy is so high, and somebody that could be extremely dangerous to have paired alongside Patrick Mahomes in the long term. But like I mentioned, the 2 young wide receivers are really what got the job done for the Chiefs passing game in this one. Travis Kelce didn't get a huge game from him, just 4 targets as a whole, 3 catches, 34 yards. But this is also, I think, to be expected. We talked about this yesterday on the show, that I do believe that Travis Kelce is not necessarily going to save himself for the playoffs. He's going to play in every single one of these games, and he's going to give it 100% every time that he's on the field. But I'm not anticipating him to, reach those extreme levels of high targets that he had for so many years. That, especially now with these other pieces, Mahomes is going to try and work these other players into the rotation as well, that their offense really could have, I would say at this moment, 3 really promising pass catchers, and then add to that the fact that Hollywood Brown was injured for this game, and when he comes back, will be interesting to see what he's able to provide for them. This is a very promising offense from a pass catching standpoint, and ultimately from the offense as a whole. Now, it's not a perfect offense. The running game was a little bit lackluster for me. Isaiah Pacheco, just 45 yards on 15 carries. You would prefer to see more there. They don't really have a backup running back behind him either. It was Justin Steele. It's Steele. I just gotta make sure I have his first name right. Carson Steele, excuse me. The undrafted free agent rookie that is essentially their running back too, at least on the ground. They did use Samaje Perine at least somewhat in the passing game, but overall just not a ton from the running game. Ultimately, outside of that Xavier Worthy touchdown run, the longest pickup from any on the ground from any runner for Kansas City was just 5 yards. So, you're talking about the running game. It's not like it's supposed to be this extremely explosive part of the game. And Isaiah Pacheco, with how hard he runs, we know that he's capable of it, at least to some degree. But, that was a good Ravens defensive front that they were facing, so I'm not overreacting. Again, maybe if I'm being nitpicky here, I would have preferred to see maybe a little bit more explosiveness from the run game, but it's also week 1, and I'm sure that across the league, these things will take time. We're going to get into that with the Ravens part of this equation as well. But before we do that, I want to just sort of finish off the Chiefs' thoughts here by talking about their defense as well. Did you notice that the Chiefs were without their number 1 cornerback from last year? Because I didn't really. And to be fair, it's not like the Ravens have an elite wide receiver 1. Zay Flowers is somebody that, you saw especially the way they were feeding him last night, that they hope that he can emerge into that. But he's not at that point yet, which is totally fair. It was the first game of his second season, that he's got time to grow. But ultimately, it's not like they have that big physical wide receiver on the perimeter that can make you pay if you're not strong enough at the cornerback position. But even with that being said, they have Trent McDuffie, who is now stepping into a new role. I thought that early on maybe he was working through some adjustments. He was a nickelback for the first couple years of his career, was all pro as a nickelback last year. Now he's playing more on the outside as their cornerback one. So overall, it was a pretty good game for him, but he's going to have some room to grow in a new position. But I mean, outside of that, I thought that the remainder of the secondary did a pretty good job in pass coverage. And it's not like they were tested super heavily necessarily, but I thought they held their own. Definitely some growing pains in terms of, just tackling and such, where I thought that Brian Cook and Shamari Connor, both of them, a little bit new faces, at least in terms of taking on a bigger role with the Chiefs defense this upcoming year. Thought that they had their moments where they had some rough tackling. Brian Cook was the one that got juked out by the goal line on that Isaiah Likely touchdown, but ultimately, I mean, again, hard to complain all too much about what the Chiefs put on film. Now, ultimately, Ravens did have over 450 yards, so I'm not, losing my mind about how good the Chiefs defense looked. But again, I thought they did a good job against the pass. I thought that the front seven was excellent in this game, outside of containing Lamar Jackson in the run game, which is obviously, where a very large portion of those yards came from. Lamar Jackson, 122 yards on the ground. But saw Chris Jones, of course, continuing to wreak havoc for other teams. He racked up a couple counting stats for himself, a sack and a tackle for a loss, but really his impact went beyond just the stat sheet, opened up opportunities for some of his other teammates. I thought that Tershawn Wharton turned in a pretty good performance, definitely took advantage of the fact that Chris Jones was demanding all of this extra attention from the Baltimore offensive line. That Wharton, he had a couple opportunities specifically matched up against Andrew Voorhees, the Ravens left guard, where he was able to put some pressures on Lamar Jackson, ultimately didn't get home, but somebody that definitely stood out on film to me that I think is a positive sign for this Chiefs defense. And anytime you're playing Lamar Jackson in the run game, it is going to be difficult to contain him. And, with all that said, I think that there's a lot that the Chiefs can feel good about. Was it a perfect performance from them? Absolutely not. But, this game also could have been different. Now, you can say that Isaiah Likely could have been tackled or such on that long touchdown. I also think that Juju Smith-Schuster could have caught that ball at the goal line. That would have allowed the Chiefs to score another touchdown at that point, so maybe they would have had more breathing room there. I'm not going to get into the whole hypothetical conversation. I thought the Chiefs let the Ravens sort of hang in the game for longer than they probably should have, but ultimately, a win's a win. And I do think that this Chiefs team as a whole looked legitimately improved from last season. The three-peat is definitely on the table, and ultimately, football is so back. Last night was an excellent game, and you just have to feel good about the season ahead. I'm really looking forward to it, but that being said, disappointment is obviously something that comes with that as well. And last night was a disappointing loss for the Ravens, who had a number of opportunities to capitalize and were unable to do so. So I want to dive into what my takeaways were for the Ravens in this game. But before we do so, we have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.